Hi, Fusionistas. We're here about to do another Chillin with a Fox. What we're going to cover today is what happens after the situation update brief, like the one you saw in our last video. Our conversation today will apply to those who will end up supporting planning efforts or will become Intel planners yourselves. The topic today is Joint Operations Planning and Executing System. I messed that up. Joint Operations Planning and Executing Systems, or JOPES. Here to help us cover this topic with a wealth of experience and knowledge is my friend and fellow Fox with over 20 years of military experience. But also, this is a great American who made our new professional-looking logo, so he's already making this program about 100 times better than I ever could, the Silver Fox.
Hey, thanks for hosting. Sip coffee. Insert coffee sip.
Insert coffee sip. All right, so picking up from where the last video left off, we gave a brief to the commander and the staff. A situation is developing in Gorgas and Novia.
Right.
And the first thing that comes to a lot of people's minds is, okay, let's start getting forces into wherever they need to be. But that's not how it goes. First, we all got to break out of the meeting and go into a back room and go, all right, do we even have something to plan from? If not, we have to develop a plan.
Right. So ideally, when you see something starting to boil over, right? So ideally, there's something on the shelf, and odds are, there is, but it may not fit the scenario perfectly, right? So there's branch and sequel things that have to be considered. So you're probably going to spin off and do some crisis action planning.
Right. So looking at the chart that you have up here, so deliberate, when we look at both the chart on that triangle and the one you put together, deliberate is the O plan, so the operations plan. There's this thought process long ago that we could go to war with Novia.
Right.
Where and when that occur kind of depends on a litany of factors. But many great Americans long ago put together this O plan, but now we find ourselves going, all right, so we look at the O plan. We're not really going to go to war with Novia, and we don't want to make an action that makes Novia go to war with us. So it's in this crisis action of, do we have a crisis? Do we not have a crisis? So now we got to go through this whole, basically a war game on how can we do this? So we can tell the National Command Authority, this is what we think we should do so we avoid war, but don't make Novia think that they can get away with anything they want.
Yeah, and I think, the key point here, I think, is that the joint planning, may sound more complex and overwhelming, but really, if you're familiar with MDMP, the system is really, parallel. It begins with, sit dev, and, you continue to evaluate multiple COAs, and then there's a COA decision brief, right? And then a COA is selected, and then you go into execution phase, right? So it's really not that different than Army, but there are a few succinct differences that are worthy of noting. So, for example, this actually happened to me. You print off an annex, right, and you run off into your next meeting, and then you're like, "Oops, I thought I printed off Annex L because I wanted to review the collection plan, but really, in the APEX format, you got the environmental considerations. So there's a few things that you kind of have to understand what's different about APEX, which is the adaptive planning and execution, right? But if you know the nuances, you can navigate through the system fine without any issues.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I had never heard of, was this whole concept of APEX. So in the Army, it's all about warning orders, op orders, fragos. And up at the joint level, you have adaptive planning and execution enterprise. And you sent me the little paragraph on it. APEX family of documents provides the standard policies and procedures to plan and execute military activities. APEX facilitates collaboration and unified action through the entire chain of command of supporting and supported commands, services, and other organizations. This includes providing informed recommendations to the President and Secretary of Defense to direct military in pursuit of national and defense policy objectives. So what you're saying is, while JOPES, JPES, depending on what acronym we're using during what decade, it's all about APEX. We got to go back to APEX. It looks very much like MDMP. And you just got to realize that certain things are in certain bins. So if you're in the Army, you go up to the joint level. It's Annex L is no longer your ISR. Annex L is your environment. But otherwise, it's really the same thing.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the same content, joint operational terms and graphics, right, is a thing. which again, nuances, right? If you speak Army, translating to joint isn't really that difficult. But just, I think the key thing is, if you've never been assigned to one of those places or been in a joint billet, it may seem foreign to you, but, just picking it up is relatively easy. But, it's important to be able to communicate effectively at that level. So, it would be a worthy investment of trying to, at least just crack the book from time to time.
Yeah. And one of the things that kind of got me about APEX is the realization that this is to inform the president and the SecDef and anybody else in the National Command Authority, because at least how we're brought up in those tactical formations, whenever the staff is working, it's working for the subordinates. The brigade headquarters is churning all the stuff to tell the battalions what to do, and the battalions churn stuff to tell the companies what to do. In this context, Denovia did something, and the first inclination is not, let's get together and figure out what we're going to do against Denovia. It's establish what's going on. So you look at that crisis action, sit dev, assess the crisis, and then develop COAs that create planning that can go upstream. So I am trying to inform my higher headquarters, the National Command Authority of the United States, before we ever start talking about what we're going to do with forces and where forces should go. This is an informative move. We're trying to enforce policy, not tell units where to go. So you got to go far left of the bang from where I'm traditionally set up to think mentally.
Right. Because a lot of what we're talking about here is left of execution, right? So, and you're getting into national policy and all the things that you kind of teed up there. So yeah, absolutely. And then once the decision's made, then, in the execution phase, we go out and execute the combat task, right? Whether it's a NEO or boots on ground assault, whatever it is, right? So, yeah, you're exactly right. And again, I think the key piece is, for those of us that have been around for a while, you've probably been part of a JTF and maybe not even realize it, because you're just in your brigade, showing up every day and slugging away at whatever your mission tasks are. But, behind the scenes, what you mentioned about, everything flows up, that's exactly correct.
Yeah, which gets annoying because when you're at the operational or tactical level, something happens and you're going, all right, let's get the order from the joint staff. And they're going, hey, we're busy trying to figure out what to tell the decision makers in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. We'll get back to you. And it kind of leaves you feeling lonely while they figure out what the appropriate military response is. They make a recommendation on what the appropriate military capabilities are, and they wait for that decision from politicians and decision makers.
Well, yeah, and you get into mission partners, right? I think nowadays more and more exercises have that, that purple flavor, right? The combined joint operational focus and mission command interoperability, right? At that level, because although the Army brigade may be the premier combat fighting force, the reality is they're probably not going to deploy by themselves. They're going to be coupled in with the host nation and or some third party actors. So that's the new reality. And when we talk about modern warfare, you kind of have to talk about multi-domain. There's other aspects that we have to consider now, right? There's a lot of framework out there to kind of peel back the onion on how to understand the operational environment, right? There's DIME, at this level, we're really talking about the big rocks, DIME. There's PMESI, ASCOPE, METTC. Those are all valuable tools. But really, when we get back to talking about how to make the sausage and understand the plan, it's really just getting into the analysis. Because when these guys, get their situation update brief, they just don't go back to their office and stare at each other, right? They're really digging through it and trying to understand. Ideally, you're already a regional expert. The reality is there's just too much stuff. And none of us are really experts on one thing, right? But if you understand the process, if you understand the framework, you can survive in any environment. And that's a tool that's always, held me in good standing. Just, if you have a master level understanding of the basics, you'll be fine.
Yeah. And so you said two things, deployment and the need to do a lot of analysis. So I think the order of march would be a lot of analysis, which is that crisis assessment and COA dev.
Yep.
It's So Intel support to planning, or whether you're an Intel planner, you as an Intel guy aren't making decisions and planning a campaign. Your job is to go back there, you brief the boss. All these operations guys and logistics personnel are going to meet in a brightly lit room and go, okay, what are we dealing with the situation? And they need to be informed about what's happening to make smart decisions. Because if we're up at this national policy level, they have to look at, how does this impact NATO? How does this impact the EU? If we do something in country A, what effect is it going to have in country B? Because this is a theater. So let's pretend, you go into Gorgas, and what it does is it upsets Ariana. Well, now you have to deal with an upset Denovia and an upset Ariana. And now you're talking about UCOM and COCOM and all this cross-organization stuff you got to do. Or maybe you think going into Pirtuni is a great idea, but what you quickly find out is all the surrounding nations don't want the U.S. to go into Pirtuni, and you kind of need them and NATO to be on your side, so you can't immediately do the extent of what you want. And they need all this analysis to go, okay, there's second and third order effects no matter what we do. We need to account for those, because what happens if we go into, like in the scenario, Lamaria, which is on the south side of Gorgas, is a Denovian, as close to ally as anything else in the scenario. So if you go into Gorgas, what happens if Denovia pushes things into Lamaria? So now you have Denovian presence on both sides of this little small country, and all you're trying to do is stabilize the situation, but you just destabilized a region. Did you account for it? And are you telling that to National Command Authority guys?
Right.
And as you said, go ahead.
No, you just, as you were talking through that little piece, I was like, oh, snap, you're talking about the TIB Fit, which I'm sure like a lot of people have heard the phrase, but don't know what the heck it is. But to your point, that's exactly why you kind of have to pregame some of these things and understand that time-phased force deployment. Right. So how do all of the things, planes, trains, automobiles, trucks, radios, beans, bullets, blankets, right, go from point A to point B? Are there no-fly zones? Is this country going to allow us to use their railroad system? Is this country going to allow us to use their major airport services? So on and so forth, right? So understanding kind of what you just said is exactly why we have a TIB Fit. And if you've heard the phrase but don't understand what it is, that's exactly what you're talking about there.
Yeah, and in the vein of CAP, or crisis action planning, so the deliberate plan made by great Americans years ago in, we'll call it O-Plan Denovia, is we're going to go to war with Denovia, so we got to get 2 corps worth of U.S. forces into Eastern Europe. Well, looking at the scenario that we had in the last video, that's not at all what you have to do. You don't need to move 2 corps to go deal with what is essentially a border squabble and economic dispute on the price of oil. And you're like, okay, so what do we actually need to move over there? And that can be exponentially smaller. And you brought up multi-domain. It's probably in this day and age a capability that wasn't accounted for in this O-Plan made years ago, updated months ago. You're like, oh,
well, it was probably last reviewed when when you had a flip phone,
right?
So, but yeah, you're exactly correct.
So now you need to retool the TIB Fit. What does it take to actually get a multinational, multi-domain unit from point A to point B? Maybe it's not from America. Maybe it's just from another NATO ally's borders. Hey, from this European nation over to this location, and that's the end of it. But then, as you said, now I got to account for, how do I move a NATO partner's kit, because they don't have the same kit we do.
Right, interoperability, right? So,
yeah.
And that's. I guess that would spur me to kind of talk about geeks, right? So, because really, as an intelligence professional, your core task is really kind of threefold in my mind's eye, right? It's maintain the COP, right? Keep pushing red diamonds, right? And there's a whole, that we could talk for a whole nother series just about that. And then you gotta, visualize and describe the operating environment, right? And maintain your thumb on the pulse of the enemy's narrative, right? So how do we do that in that environment? Well, one of the tools, in keeping with our topic, is geeks. Again, that's one of those things that you may have heard of but don't understand it, right? So there's Geeks A, there's Geeks Army, right? And in concept that, well, not in concept, it is. is designed to feed the global information architecture, right? Which is GeeksJ or Geeks Joint. And inside that platform, you have a suite of tools, designed to do all the stuff that we're talking about. Some of them that you might be familiar with or maybe not include, the Geeks i3 architecture, which is the, integrated imagery and intelligence. That was a significant upgrade, as they continually, polish the requirements for Geeks. That was a significant thing. And then you probably have heard of Agile or Agile Client. That's a very powerful tool to do some of the things that we're talking about. And you don't need, a big stack of stuff. If you have the right, G6 or, 35 Tango support that has, those sysad privileges, they can install Agile Client on pretty much anything, right? And that gives you a whole suite of tools that give you additional capability to do just that, maintain situational understanding through a global COP, messaging, and a bunch of other stuff. So I think that's key to understand too, that those resources are available to you in that environment, and you just need to know how to tap into them.
Yeah, at least from my lens, when you don't know what's going on up at this level and you start hearing terms, so the joint staff or the COCOM, the combatant command staff is going, hey, I need you to feed everything into Geeks or Agile. And you're sitting there going, it's a Word document. Why do you need me to feed this into anything? I'll just email it to you, right? They're like, no, man, I need to pull this together so I can sit with maneuver guys and fire guys and logistics guys, and we can all go, hey, this is the situation of the operational environment. This is where we can move, can't move, and all this. And we need to package this so that the chiefs of staff can see it. So we go back up your triangle. Hey, above the combatant command, right, I have the chiefs of staff, the State Department, the National Security Council, the CIA, all these people are getting fed in one way, shape, or form off of GeeksJ. Maybe someone just hits print on GeeksJ and they send it in an email. That's beside the point. But you're having to feed up so that people in the NCA can make decisions, push it back down, probably through GeeksJ, and then the stuff can come back out. And it just seems like a burden, but that's the tool set and the system used to work a lot of these things.
Yeah, and there's, you see all the different chunks in there. Like, I think most military folks, you kind of focus on whatever your combat specialty is, but we kind of have to be, if we major in intelligence, right, you kind of have to minor in communications and logistics. But there's other folks that are experts on that stuff. But, you see there's the logistics block on that chart there's a pretty big chunk there, right? And, how does it all work? And then you got the information architecture and transport and all that stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. Those are tools that are all inside these systems that we're talking about. Again, I think it's not something you should panic over. But again, know how to tap into these things. And, if you've never had a Geeks class, the Joint Staff J7 guys, have a mobile training team, and they'd probably be more than happy to come out and give you a class, or heck, there might even be some web-based training and stuff that you might be able to tap into. It's been a minute since I've looked at some of that stuff, but I still have the Geeks manuals in my archives. Because I'm a pack rat and don't throw anything away, but it's part of what has made me successful over the years, just understanding it. So I offer that to you.
And that's a great point that I think a lot of junior 35 Foxes and maybe some mid-grade 35 Foxes or 350 Foxes go intel planning, support to planning. Look, my job is to assess what the adversary is doing and move on, and someone else makes this plan. And you go, no. Unfortunately, they're soldier of younger years. The higher up you go in the rank, the more you're involved in this. We have to provide information to make a great plan. So when we start a campaign, we do it on the correct footing. So you're involved in this. Understanding it as a younger soldier helps you be more proficient. And as you said, like a master at the generalities and everything when you end up in some of these positions.
Yep. And, the inverse may be true, and you never know, right? Because there's junior soldiers at the Pentagon, and, they don't know what they don't know. You might have that aha moment after the fact, right? But again, at that level, it's just different. But we all feed the machine, right? In some way or form. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is not very common. And, I think it's important just to highlight a few things. I appreciate the opportunity for bringing me in on that.
We'd just like to thank you all for listening in, joining us on 35 Fox Talks. We'll close out again with the reminder that this is happening up at that theater strategic level. And what we tried to lay out is at that level, when something happens, the first thing that everyone does at a theater strategic level is they look back at existing plans, they see what needs to be adjusted, they push recommendations up the chain of command to the National Command Authority, and then everything happens down after that once decisions are made. And as Silver Fox said, look, it's all really the same, called by different names wherever you're at. So don't panic if you're up at the joint staff level and you go down to a brigade, or you're at a brigade and you go up to the joint staff level. Just learn the new lingo, and it's roughly the same thing, and follow those processes. Right. And then learn the acronyms. Yeah, occasionally open up the O plan so you know what's going on. And then just learn the acronyms. TIB Fit, how are we going to get planes, trains, and automobiles from point A to point B? And APEX is just an adaptive planning format, right? Any departing words for us there, Fox, of senior seasoning?
No, I just, if you guys have ever worked with me, you know that, I'm a fan of this stuff. And, all you can really do is show up every day and, be a master of your craft and be a student of our profession. And if you live within those guidelines, you'll be successful. I have no doubt. So I wish you all well.